In Lafayette, Louisiana, what began as a seemingly fresh start took a dark and irreversible turn. A woman opened her home and heart to someone from her past, unaware that her trust would soon lead to a devastating discovery. What appeared to be the beginning of a second chance quickly spiraled into a nightmare. On the morning of February 27, 2024, Eric Carter pulled into a quiet apartment complex near the crossroads of East Simcoe Street and Pinhook Road. The 37-year-old hadn't heard from his ex-wife, 36-year-old Melanie Carter, in over 2 days. Though the couple was separated and moving toward divorce, they remained in touch due to shared financial responsibilities and ongoing property discussions. Silence from Melanie wasn't normal, and Eric knew it. Unable to shake a growing sense of dread, Eric took a step most wouldn't consider. He accessed their old shared iCloud account to check the location of her phone. It showed the device hadn't moved since the night of February 26. That was the final push he needed. He arrived at her apartment just after 10:40 a.m. and knocked. No response. The door was locked, and everything on the outside appeared undisturbed. After waiting roughly 15 minutes and feeling something was deeply wrong, Eric called 911 at 10:56 a.m. Deputies from the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office arrived soon after. With help from the apartment manager, officers entered the unit at 11:34 a.m. What they found confirmed Eric's worst fears. Inside, the apartment bore subtle but alarming signs of chaos. Kitchen drawers had been pulled open. A coffee mug sat on the counter, half full, next to scattered receipts and utensils. Melanie's purse lay unzipped on a stool, with its contents partially spilled. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. In that bedroom, near the foot of the bed, deputies found Melanie. She was lying on her right side, partially covered by a white sheet. The scene was chilling. She had sustained numerous stab wounds to her chest and abdomen. Blood pooled into the carpet. Her hands showed signs of struggle, cuts and bruises pointing to a desperate attempt to defend herself. There was no sign of a weapon in the apartment. Melanie's phone, damaged and powered off, was discovered under the bed. Her wallet was missing, and detectives quickly noted there were no signs of forced entry. The door lock was untouched, and the windows were sealed and undisturbed. Officers secured the scene and began a full forensic investigation. As they canvassed the building, a neighbor across the hall recalled hearing raised voices coming from Melanie's apartment around 2 a.m. on February 26. The argument sounded intense but muffled, enough that the neighbor mistook it for a loud TV show and didn't report it at the time. Inside the unit, detectives found a lease agreement on a small desk by the living room wall. It was dated February 22, 2024, just 5 days before Melanie's body was found. Her name appeared as the main tenant. Under other occupants, one name stood out: Daniel Rivos. His signature was clearly visible. Investigators ran his name through criminal databases. The results came back quickly, and what they uncovered raised serious concerns. Daniel Rivos had just been released on parole from Louisiana State Penitentiary on February 23, a mere 4 days before Melanie was found dead. He had been serving a 9-year sentence for robbery and grand theft and was released after completing 6 years. Notably, the Lafayette apartment wasn't listed as his official residence on parole documents. In fact, no known address linked him to the area at all. Detectives now had a suspect, and a rapidly developing timeline that placed him at the center of the investigation. The Lafayette Parish Coroner's Office took custody of Melanie's body, estimating the time of death to have occurred late on February 25 or in the early hours of February 26. An autopsy was scheduled for the following day to confirm the exact cause and time of death. The homicide unit launched a full-scale investigation. Teams collected fingerprints, photographed the scene in detail, and conducted digital extractions from Melanie's laptop and phone. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, one thing was certain. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was deeply personal. What began as a woman offering someone a new start ended in betrayal and loss. And as the case unfolded, the community watched in shock as the truth behind that fateful week came to light. What was meant to be a new chapter for Melanie instead became her tragic final story. As investigators dug deeper into the mysterious death of Melanie Carter, attention quickly turned to a name that had only recently entered her life, Daniel Rivos. Within hours of discovering Melanie's body, law enforcement added Rivos to the National Crime Information Center (NCIC) database as a person of interest. A bolo, be on the lookout, went out across nearby states. Time was of the essence, and the race to track down his movements between February 23 and February 27 had begun. That same evening, forensic teams remained at the apartment, meticulously collecting evidence. Meanwhile, Melanie's family had been notified of her death, and her estranged husband, Eric Carter, stayed on the scene, cooperating fully with investigators. He appeared stunned by the revelation of Rivos's connection to Melanie. He told officers he had never heard of the man before. Unbeknownst to most of her friends and family, Melanie had been corresponding with Rivos for nearly a year. Their connection had started through a pen pal program designed to help incarcerated individuals combat isolation. Jennifer Harris, a volunteer with a Baton Rouge-based nonprofit that focuses on prison rehabilitation, had paired them in early 2023. At the time, Rivos, then 26, was serving a 9-year sentence at Angola prison for multiple robbery and theft convictions. His criminal record, dating back to 2017, included a string of nonviolent break-ins and a botched attempt to rob a pawn shop in Jefferson Parish. With 6 years served and a clean disciplinary history, he had begun participating in re-entry initiatives and applying for early release. Melanie, a licensed nail technician who ran her business from her home in Lafayette, had quietly joined the pen pal program. In fact, she used an alias in her first letter. Friends told police she rarely mentioned her participation, saying only that she had an interest in prison reform and psychology. But behind closed doors, the relationship with Rivos had taken on a more personal dimension. Investigators found more than 700 email exchanges on Melanie's laptop, spanning a 10-month period. What started off as casual and supportive turned into something more intense. Over time, the tone shifted toward emotional intimacy and even plans for a shared future after his release. By August 2023, Melanie had been added to Rivos's approved visitor list. Between October and January, she made 5 documented trips to Angola prison. Records from her bank showed weekly transfers of $200 to $300 to Rivos's commissary account beginning in May 2023, over $9,000 sent in total. She was clearly committed to supporting him both emotionally and financially. Eric Carter later admitted that he had noticed some discrepancies in their shared business account but had assumed they were related to Melanie's nail business expenses. The Carters had been separated since early 2023. Although they continued to share a home for a few months afterward, Eric described their relationship as increasingly distant. On February 6, 2024, Melanie officially filed for divorce, citing emotional disconnection and irreconcilable differences. No disputes over property or custody were noted, and the paperwork was still being processed at the time of her death. Rivos's parole was granted earlier that same month. His official release date was set for February 23, 2024. Melanie was the one who picked him up that morning. Security footage at Angola prison showed her arriving in a silver Hyundai Elantra registered in her name. She signed the necessary paperwork, and the two left together at around 9:15 a.m. No transitional housing or halfway house placement had been arranged for Rivos. On his release documents, he listed Melanie's Lafayette address as his place of residence. Melanie had prepared for this moment. Just a day before his release, on February 22nd, she had rented a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Lafayette. The lease showed her as the primary tenant and Rivos as her domestic partner. She even furnished the space, purchasing essentials like a mattress, cookware, and hygiene items from local stores. Receipts and surveillance footage confirmed the purchases took place on February 23 and 24. One additional detail stood out. Melanie had provided Rivos with a debit card preloaded with $1,500 registered in her name. What seemed to be a hopeful new chapter for two people trying to rebuild their lives together had instead set the stage for a tragedy that no one could have predicted. The investigation now had a clearer picture, but the hunt for Rivos and the motive behind Melanie's death was far from over. In the days before her tragic death, those close to Melanie Carter noticed subtle but unsettling changes in her demeanor. Friends described her as anxious and unusually guarded. At her apartment complex, neighbors recalled her making trips alone, carrying groceries by herself, eyes constantly darting behind her as if expecting something or someone to appear. Notably, no one in the building had seen her new partner, Daniel Rivos, outside the unit until the early hours of February 26th. He had remained entirely unseen, tucked away behind closed doors. As the investigation unfolded, a clearer picture of Melanie's final days began to take shape. Interviews with friends revealed a mounting sense of unease. One friend shared a concerning message Melanie had sent on February 25th. "He's not the same person from the letters." That same thread revealed another disturbing line. "He talks like he's owed something." Perhaps the most haunting piece of evidence came in the form of an unsent message, left as a draft on Melanie's phone. Time-stamped at 1:54 a.m. on February 26, it read simply, "I think he's going to hurt me." It would be her last digital trace. Then, a break in the case. On the morning of February 28th, just under 2 days after Melanie's body was discovered, one of her missing debit cards was used. At 7:13 a.m., a $42.19 transaction went through at a gas station in Bethany, Texas, nearly 400 miles west of Lafayette. Investigators reached out to the gas station owner, who quickly handed over transaction logs and surveillance footage. The video was clear. A man matching Daniel Rivos' description was seen using the pump. He wore a dark hoodie and a baseball cap, and drove a gray Ford Fusion, later confirmed to be Melanie's vehicle. He appeared alone, stayed under 10 minutes, and avoided all interaction. The use of Melanie's card and PIN, along with surveillance confirmation, meant one thing: Rivos had crossed state lines. That development triggered a multi-agency response. The U.S. Marshals Service was brought in, along with the Texas Department of Public Safety. Based on travel estimates and fuel range, the search narrowed to the Austin region. On March 1st, at approximately 3:25 p.m., a Texas state trooper spotted a gray Ford Fusion parked behind an abandoned trailer park just outside the small community of Delva, east of Austin. The car had been partially concealed by brush. Officers set up a perimeter. Minutes later, a man resembling Rivos bolted from a nearby shed. The foot chase didn't last long. Officers captured Rivos in a wooded area behind the property line. He was unarmed, but carrying several key items: $760 in cash, Melanie's debit card, and a prepaid phone registered in her name. Though the phone had been factory reset, digital experts later recovered enough data to confirm its usage history. Inside his backpack, authorities found hygiene supplies, snacks, spare clothing, and a folding knife. The blade, roughly 4 inches long, was stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Later forensic tests confirmed it. The blood belonged to Melanie Carter. Partial fingerprints on the handle were also a match for Rivos. He was arrested and taken to the Travis County Jail, booked under a fugitive warrant issued by Louisiana. 2 days later, on March 3, he was extradited to Lafayette, escorted by federal marshals. Upon arrival, Rivos immediately invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to answer any questions. He requested legal representation and provided no explanation for the injuries observed on his body. Officers documented deep scratch marks along both of his hands, likely from defensive wounds, and bruising across his upper chest and neck. Though silent, his body told part of the story. Back in Lafayette, forensic teams continued to process the mountain of evidence. The most critical piece came from Melanie's autopsy, skin cells found beneath her fingernails. DNA testing on March 4 confirmed the tissue belonged to Daniel Rivos, indicating a violent struggle. Investigators reconstructed a chilling timeline. Melanie Carter had been killed within 36 hours of Rivos's release from prison. In less than 3 days of freedom, he had gone from walking out of Angola's gates to committing a brutal act that ended the life of the very woman who had helped him start over. What began as a hopeful effort to give someone a second chance became a story of deception, danger, and devastating loss. From the moment Daniel Rivos walked free from Angola prison, he was supposed to be under supervision. But in the days that followed, parole officers lost track of him entirely. There were no check-ins, no home visits, and no confirmations of the Lafayette address he had listed. That oversight would later come under intense scrutiny. By March 6, 2024, just days after Melanie Carter's body was found in her apartment, the Lafayette Parish District Attorney's Office announced formal charges against Rivos: first-degree murder, felony theft, and fleeing justice across state lines. He was ordered held without bond at the Lafayette Parish Correctional Center while the case moved forward. Investigators began combing through Melanie's digital footprint: emails, texts, cloud backups, and device sync logs. Her iCloud account, linked to both her iPhone and MacBook, became a goldmine for evidence. It revealed a relationship far more complex and troubling than anyone had suspected. One particularly significant thread of messages was exchanged between Melanie and a friend identified in legal filings as Nicole M. On February 24th, Melanie had written, "He's intense but sweet, says I'm the only family he's got." But the mood had clearly shifted within just 24 hours. On the night of February 25, mere hours before her death, she wrote, "He's been weird all day, cold, I think he wants something." These digital messages would later serve as emotional snapshots of Melanie's growing discomfort and fear. The lease signed just before Rivos' release, dated February 22nd, listed him not just as a roommate, but as Melanie's domestic partner. That detail became a key piece of the prosecution's argument. Melanie had offered him trust, stability, and a place to start fresh. The lease had been electronically signed and verified by the building's property manager during pretrial proceedings. Further evidence came from the apartment complex's entry logs and surveillance cameras. Records showed Rivos entering the building multiple times between February 23rd and 26th. At 3:16 a.m. on the morning of the 26th, he was caught on camera leaving the building with a backpack and dark duffel bag. He was alone. After that, he vanished. Bank records showed a $400 ATM withdrawal from Melanie's account at 6:37 a.m. on February 26th in Lake Charles, just hours after investigators estimate she was killed. Security footage confirmed the use of her debit card and PIN. In total, 5 purchases and 2 cash withdrawals were made using Melanie's accounts in the 3 days following her death, as Rivos fled across state lines. Back inside the apartment, forensic specialists found Rivos' fingerprints on several surfaces, including drawer handles, the sink faucet, and the front doorknob. There were no signs of forced entry. The lock was undisturbed. Authorities concluded that Rivos had been willingly let into the home and had never left until after Melanie was dead. An autopsy completed on February 28th revealed 5 stab wounds, 3 in the chest, 2 in the lower abdomen. One had punctured her left lung and was deemed fatal. Bruises on Melanie's arms and wrists suggested she had been restrained. The coroner ruled her death a homicide caused by sharp force trauma. Toxicology reports came back clean, no alcohol or drugs in her system. Multiple neighbors provided witness statements, telling detectives that they saw Melanie coming and going with groceries during the first 2 days after Rivos was released. None of them reported seeing him help her. One neighbor even recalled Melanie looking anxious as she unloaded her car on February 24th, saying she kept glancing around like she felt she was being watched. Melanie's emails further confirmed she had been logging into her bank accounts regularly, with numerous large withdrawals made between February 23rd and 25th. One memo simply read, "For Daniel."
The financial trail suggested a motive. She had not only supported Rivos while he was behind bars, but continued to do so after his release. Nothing of significant value was missing from the apartment. Melanie's cracked phone was found under her bed, containing numerous photos of Rivos taken during those final 2 days, images that would later match the clothes on him during his arrest. Prosecutors dismissed any claims of self-defense. The lack of injuries on Melanie indicating aggression, the nature and placement of the wounds, and the immediate flight all pointed to something far more sinister. They emphasized the overwhelming imbalance in strength, the calculated timing of the financial withdrawals, and the rapid escape that followed. In the end, technology, timing, and trust betrayed Daniel Rivos and gave Melanie Carter a voice even in death.
By the time Daniel Rivos stood before a jury, the case against him had become one of the most closely watched in Lafayette Parish. What began as a tragic homicide investigation had grown into a courtroom battle centered around betrayal, manipulation, and premeditated violence. On October 7, 2024, the trial began at Lafayette Parish Criminal Court. Rivos faced 3 serious felony charges: first-degree murder, felony robbery, and fleeing to avoid prosecution. Jury selection had wrapped up the previous week, and security around the courthouse was heightened due to the case's sensitive nature. Every word was recorded by court officials as the community waited for justice to unfold. Judge Lucinda Martian presided over the trial. A seasoned figure on the criminal bench with more than 2 decades of experience, Martian was known for her calm, deliberate approach. Leading the prosecution was Assistant District Attorney Mark Kellerman, who opened by laying out a detailed timeline, from Rivos's release from Angola prison on February 23 to his arrest in rural Texas on March 1. The state's case was built around a clear argument that Rivos had deliberately taken advantage of Melanie Carter's generosity, relying on her financially and emotionally, only to murder her within 72 hours of his release. Prosecutors accused him of taking her debit card, stealing funds, and fleeing across state lines in an attempt to avoid justice. Digital forensics experts were among the first to testify. They presented emails and messages exchanged between Melanie and Rivos, communications that began romantically but took a darker turn. Jurors read through select messages, including Melanie's final chilling text to a close friend, where she expressed fear and unease. Investigators then walked the court through the evidence: how Rivos had accessed Melanie's online bank accounts, withdrawn large sums of money, and used her debit card in multiple states. Photos of the crime scene were shown to the jury, high-resolution images of the apartment, along with diagrams marking where key items were found, including Melanie's damaged phone and the absence of her wallet. The coroner's testimony confirmed the brutality of the attack: 5 stab wounds, with 1 piercing her lung. Defensive wounds on her hands and bruises on her arms revealed the struggle she endured. Prosecutors painted a picture of an attack that was both violent and prolonged. Melanie's estranged husband, Eric Carter, also took the stand. He spoke about noticing unusual withdrawals from their joint bank account in late 2023 and early 2024. Although they had separated, their finances were still entangled. Eric also recalled how Melanie had grown emotionally distant and secretive in the months leading up to her death. Further forensic testimony tied Rivos directly to the scene. His fingerprints were found throughout the apartment. DNA collected from beneath Melanie's fingernails matched his, and the folding knife recovered from his backpack tested positive for her blood. It was believed to be the murder weapon. The defense, led by public defender Lisa Trujillo, didn't challenge the fact that Rivos had been present or that he had a relationship with Melanie. Instead, their focus was on his mental condition. Trujillo argued that Rivos had suffered from what she described as institutional trauma, having spent 6 years behind bars. She claimed that he was overwhelmed by the demands of re-entry and acted out of emotional instability, not premeditated intent. Still, the prosecution remained firm, guiding jurors through detailed visual aids, maps tracing Rivos's movements, financial charts, and a digital timeline of events. The state rested its case on October 14th,
followed by the defense on October 15th. Closing arguments were delivered on October 16th, with each side urging the jury to consider motive, mental state, and the weight of the evidence. After 9 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered its unanimous verdict on October 18th, guilty on all counts. Louisiana law allows sentencing to begin immediately after a verdict in capital cases. Prosecutors wasted no time. They filed their intent to seek the death penalty, citing financial motive, the quick time frame between parole and the murder, and the pre-planned flight across state lines. The sentencing phase began on November 3, 2024. The same courtroom reconvened to determine Rivos' fate. Would he serve life without parole or face capital punishment? Judge Marchand once again presided, and both sides presented their final arguments. The courtroom was packed. Family members, law enforcement officials, and members of the media filled every available seat. Security remained strict as emotions ran high. The proceedings began with victim impact statements, emotional testimonies from those closest to Melanie, reminding the court of the life lost and the pain left behind. The jury now...
Melanie Carter's brother, Thomas, was the first to speak during the sentencing phase. With a prepared statement in hand, he described Melanie as someone whose compassion knew no limits and whose kindness was ultimately taken advantage of. Daniel Rivos wasn't just reckless, he said. He was calculated, a predator who waited for an open door. Following him was Melanie's former husband, Eric Carter. His message was short but heavy with emotion. "She may have moved on from our marriage," he told the jury, "but she didn't deserve to be taken from this life. What happened to her wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate choice." The defense, led by Lisa Trujillo, urged the jury to consider life imprisonment instead of the death penalty. She acknowledged the seriousness of the crime, but asked the court to reflect on Rivos's young age, just 27 at the time, and his sudden shift from prison to freedom. Referencing studies on post-release trauma, she argued that while Rivos should never be released, taking his life wasn't justice, it was irreversible. But the prosecution stood firm. Assistant District Attorney Mark Kellerman emphasized the evidence of planning, the financial motivation, and the rapid escape attempt. "This wasn't a moment of panic," he said. "It was a plan, and within 3 days of parole, it ended in murder." After just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous decision: death by lethal injection. Judge Marchand read the sentence aloud at 4:18 p.m. By law, the case now moves to automatic appeal. As the sentence was announced, Daniel Rivos remained silent. He was returned to Louisiana State Penitentiary, this time to death row, just months after walking out on parole.